This is eCoffee with Experts, where marketers and founders share what's actually working in SEO, AI, and digital growth. Grab your coffee and fuel your mind as we chat with top minds about their wins, struggles, and lessons you won't find in a blog post. Brought to you by Digital Web Solutions, we bring real talk to help you grow your business, one episode at a time. Let's get started.
Luis, there's a lot of things changing and remote work is now kind of mainstream. What's the top of mind for you in terms of how you view remote culture today?
That's a good question. Well, I would say that remote culture today is much more mainstream than usual, right? Much more mainstream than it used to be. So it's actually about how you project trust, right, to your employee, to your employers, and to your colleagues, right? And how you really create that feeling of being a part of the team, even when you're not physically present, right? But more than that, right? I think that there's a personal component to it that people don't entirely appreciate. We as human beings crave structure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, really easy when you don't have a place, a physical location that you walk or commute to work every day, to miss on that structure. And then you suddenly, right, become, and I've seen this, I've struggled this with myself, some years ago, and I always see a lot of people struggling with it. You just become very disorganized, right? You become, It's not that you become lazy per se, but you find it hard to focus. Right, it becomes hard to focus. The going to a building used to bring structure. So a thing that I've seen and I've tried to make happen in all the remote teams that I've worked with, right, and I've generally seen that be very, very successful, is just to guide and incentivize people to create rituals and structure around their work.
Rituals and structures. Coming from, I'm going to dig into your background here because I think the audience will really appreciate, as I did, where you came from before you got into what you're doing now. But the ritualistic, the structure of your day, I recognize it when I have that in my day because I work remote. Everything just goes way smoother. So you're right. It's like when people first started taking on remote work, they're like, I can wake up whenever I want. I don't have to, have this, this schedule. But what I found is like I have my own commute and I have my own office. Like my commute for me in the morning is a gym session. And then my commute at night is a shower, like another shower, like just quick rinse, after the workday. And that's like my commute. That's what separates. I have barriers. Like if I close my door, my fiance knows that means I am like unavailable to chat. So there are specific things that I've found ritualistically that help me. But before you got into remote work, take us back. You were a dentist for over a decade. I guess what was it about that career that made you realize that you were kind of maybe not on the path that you wanted to stay on for the rest of your life?
Yeah, well, the transition was a bit more smooth than that. I wasn't really dentist one day and remote, head of marketing in the other, right? I did, there was a smoother transition. I did a little bit of journalism. I also actually did a little bit of journalism before I got my master's in dental medicine. So, there was a bit, but it essentially, it was the situation where I was quite enjoying being a dentist, but I didn't like the state of the market, right? So I was living in Portugal. I had, family to take care of, parents that weren't getting any younger. So I didn't really it wasn't really enticing to move away from where I was, but from where I was, the market for dentistry was not that hot. There was very high competition. The clients were gravitating to low ticket items, and I had life goals, right? I had life goals, and I felt like, okay, this job is really fulfilling, but it doesn't feel like I can meet my life goals doing that. And it's not great for my health either to just be stuck in a dental office, right? 8 hours, 10 hours a day. So let's try to find something that I also enjoy doing, but will be a little better, right? For my, just for my health and for my future projects.
Yeah.
So I had been doing some writing, right, even before I graduated. Somehow I got a stint working at one of the first Portuguese video gaming blogs. And eventually I made that. I taught myself podcasting and I created the first video game podcast in Portuguese.
Nice.
And but again, once I was trying to explore that side of things, as it turns out, the Portuguese market is not especially well paying for video game content. So I began exploring international content, and I got some job at doing some video game journalism for publications in the US and the UK. And that eventually, led me to go to content marketing, into content marketing, to strategy, to team management, etc. And that landed me where I've been probably for 7 years now, began as director of marketing at DistantJob, and as now there's another director of marketing, and I am CMO.
Yeah. I mean, what a cool weaving around of a career journey. And what I really appreciate about what you said is I have life goals and I'm thinking about my health, which I think is kind of more of a European way of thinking of like, I need to there are other things that are important to me. You mentioned your family that you had to take care of. There are other things outside of my career. I can still have a fulfilling and enriching and successful career, but it's just one part. It doesn't have to be the whole thing, right?
Well, it should connect, right? I mean, money is very important to fulfilling your health goals and your social goals, as it turns out, right? So, of course, if you hate yourself making that money, that defeats the purpose somewhat. So, again, it's you need to make they complement each other, right? It can't be one or the other.
Yeah. So bring me up to speed with DistantJob. DistantJob calls itself the first remote recruitment agency. What does that position actually mean operationally? And I guess what did the first companies that you pitched think of when you told them that you were going to find, full-time employees anywhere in the world?
Yeah. So that was, again, I'm not with the company from the beginning, right? So DistantJob is a recruitment agency that specializes in finding software developers, right? Remote software developers. And the twist here is that it's not just software developers that want a job, but that genuinely want to work for you, right? The distinction, as it turns out, is the whole game. It's more important than the remote. But of course, the remote play enters in terms of what I call geo-arbitrage, right? The competition for this kind of talent in the US is super fierce, right? If you want senior developers, high quality, that are a culture fit, right? You're going to have to pay a lot of money for that. And, you probably are going to have to compromise somewhat, just because there's a huge competition for those roles. Now, the incredible thing that our founder Sharon Koifman found out is that actually, great talent does not exist exclusively in the United States of America, North America even, right? There's more or less an even spread. Of course, culture matters, right? And education level matters. But there are great software developers all over the world. So as long as you can find the ones that fit into a North American work culture and the time zones and etc., right? You can actually get a lot more bang for your buck when you hire internationally. So that was the genesis of it.
Which it makes sense. I mean, a lot of the agencies that I work with, they are global agencies. I mean, they even if they have 10 employees, the design team is in Colombia, the customer service is in Vietnam, and then maybe the creative team is in, I don't know, who knows, Eastern Europe or somewhere. And then the founder or the, exec team is like in North America somewhere. Typically the structure that I see, but I think a big part of what they all talk about is communication. Tell me a little bit more about when you guys vet candidates, communication counts for 50% of the score. I guess, what does a candidate who fails on the communication actually look like in a live interview, and how is that different from what most hiring managers think that communication skills are?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you ask about the live interview, because the live interview is the easiest thing to fake, right? Everyone can be a good communicator for 15 minutes. Right. I actually pay more attention to what precedes it. Right. Because in remote work, you can do obviously live communication, and you should. This is actually a little point of contention, between me and some colleagues, right? Whose opinion I respect a lot much. But I actually think that the key even if live communication is important, the key is the sync communication. So I pay a lot of attention, to their email communication. Are they clear? Are they specific? When they send their CV, how structured, how organized it is? Because the one thing that you do not want to happen when you hire a remote employee is not knowing what they're up to, right, every day. Right. That is the thing, because it really erodes trust, right? The moment you're thinking, what is that person up to?
What are they doing?
The trust. Yeah, exactly. The trust is eroded. So actually, the thing that I appreciate most, right, is the people who don't waste my time, who communicate with clarity, communicate often, right? People who just keep me up to speed. And this is something that's tough to figure out in a single conversation or a single email. But during the hiring process, right, you get several touch points where you can see, is this person communicating with clarity, with brevity, with intent? Are they keeping us up to speed? Are they clear? Do they go missing, right?
Yeah.
Without explanation? Do they just disappear, right? If we have something, if we have an email exchange, actively, planning a job interview, and the person goes dark, right, for 2 days, not the weekend, of course, but in the middle of the week, it's like, again, we don't want to judge anyone too harshly, but that is a data point.
Yeah, of course. I mean, especially during the middle of the week, like worked for a remote agency, and they had a whole SOP on asynchronous communication. And the expectation was, if you can respond, respond immediately. If you can't, send an emoji that's like eyes looking, like the side eye looking. And they had different emojis, different ways to communicate that basically says, hey, I see this message, I'm taking action on it, or I see it, I'm not taking action on it yet. And basically communicating. What I also see as a challenge with remote teams is this siloing of information. It seems like everybody's working on similar projects where obviously we're all going towards the same goal, but departments assume that other departments have the same context that they do. So they jump into a conversation, and it's like a half-built conversation to the person that they're, prompting, the person that they're being introduced to, while on the, the prompter side actually has full context. How do you get around that? How do you share full context?
Yeah, so I'm going to start by quoting, right, our founder, Sharon Koifman, who actually wrote a book about this very subject. It's called Surviving Remote Work, right? And this point that I really like is that if you are in that situation, your company also doesn't work non-remotely in a proper manner, right? It's just that you're using the fact that everyone is in the office as a scaffolding, right, to compensate for not having your operation set up properly. The thing that remote work does is that it forces you to confront the fact that your operational documentation sucks. Because if you are running a proper, successful company, right? If your company is the kind of company, so there's this awesome book, very popular, very old, The E-Myth Revisited, I think it's called, right? Which they make the point that a good company is a company that's turnkey, that tomorrow you can sell it, give the keys to the new owner, and they will be able to run it, right? That is the benchmark for a great company. And that means that every single step of every single process needs to be documented. There needs to be an instruction manual that goes from running the company to taking out the trash. And if you have that in a remote environment, I guarantee you that the remote environment will work exactly as well as the non-remote environment.
Hey, we hope you're enjoying the coffee and the conversation so far. This show is powered by Digital Web Solutions. And if you've ever wondered how the biggest brands actually build authority, this is it. DWS has a massive network of over 250,000 publishers, real sites that help you rank on Google, and more importantly, stay visible in AI search. It's the heavy lifting most teams just can't do on their own. As a thank you for listening, they're offering an exclusive free strategy call just for our eCoffee listeners. It's a great way to map out your authority plan for 2026. Just click the link below to book yours and see how they can help scale your brand. All right, now let's get back to the show. I am such a proponent of processes, SOPs, and I think I have an innate sense of logic, of how can you expect me to do something if there's not a step-by-step instruction of how to do it? It's innate in me, and I feel like I create processes even when they're not needed, maybe too much.
Well,
How do you go about creating processes in an efficient manner, knowing that most small businesses, especially a founder-led business, if they don't have it documented, they can't even think of taking the time to actually document the process so that they can bring on help. How do you make that easy?
So do you want the boring but very accurate answer, or do you want the more exciting but perhaps not 100% yet their answer?
Give me the accurate one, and then we'll get more flamboyant. How about that?
Okay, so the accurate one, which is what I've been doing, for many years, which is that you write stuff down as you go, right? You give it to your employees as they do their job. You ask for feedback. You iterate. You on the A-team/C-suite meetings, you go over it with your peers. You get people's opinions, right? You make executive decisions, of course, otherwise you'll just be paralyzed in analysis mode. But it's a document that you build, right? And you revise as you go through things, right? These days, the thing that I've been thinking about, we were talking about AI before, I'm very suspicious of AI, right? We've talked about this. I think that AI often gives you shoddy work that looks very good, very professional, and very thought out, right? But this is one thing that I found AI is very strong. So what is the current process, right? Is I have a cloud co-work space set up. I use specifically cloud. I mean, I don't own stock, right?
Sure.
in any traffic, but I just found that it's the one that works best for this purpose, right? I have the company operation documentation, right, in a folder that you can access and edit at will, right? And then I record everything. If this were a DistantJob call, we would be recording it and we would be making decisions and we would be going, through the processes, right? And, I feed all the transcripts to Claude and I ask it, based on the hard-coded documentation processes, right? What are the next steps for this? We made new decisions on this call, right? Please update the documentation processes based on that. What I found is that AI, although I'm very cautious about using AI, but when it comes to updating structured documents and condensing wide-ranging conversations into strict bullet points, I find that it's quite good and it saves dozens of hours.
Yeah. I absolutely love Claude. And you make a key point here that I think is different from other models. I could be wrong, but since Claude has access to your desktop, it has project folders where it can change what's in the project folder just with commands. You don't have to go in and change those yourself. You can just ask it to change. So I think that's a key distinguishing factor of using Claude.
Keep backups though.
Keep backups.
Yes.
The most recent version. So you're saying like after a change is made, download it?
Yeah, no, I'm saying don't have your root copy of your documentation folder, be completely editable by Claude, right? By Claude, right? Just make sure that after a week of Claude messing around with it, go and check to see if it hasn't actually erased half of the document.
Yeah,
right.
Which could be another automation workflow. Now Claude Code has a schedule trigger, which you could probably schedule some sort of zap. Yeah. I don't want to get into the workflows because I could go all day on that stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So bring me into your podcast, because we're on a podcast now. You mentioned you're not running it too much nowadays, but you leveraged that podcast to talk to smart people in large organizations. Was that the original intent, or how did you think about the podcast as a tool for connection?
You're making me feel very smart. I really am very, very humble that you would think that I was being that strategic. No, I landed a job in a remote first company after being a dentist for 9 years. I didn't know anything about what I was doing, so I needed to learn. And I felt that, if I go to these people, the top experts in the whole world about remote work, and I just impinge myself upon their time, they're going to turn me down. But maybe if I invite them onto a podcast, right, that would work.
Yeah.
So basically, I used it to build, to talk to all the people I felt I could learn something from.
Yeah.
And it was basically an excuse, which turned out, as it happens, to be a pretty nifty digital asset at the end of the day. But my plan was nothing so elaborate. I just felt that I had several shortcomings in the industry, and this was the fastest way to try to learn what I needed.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great way. It's absolutely a great way to do that. You're right. Like, there's sort of an ego play when people get invited onto a media appearance, as opposed to like, do you want to take a demo or a sales call? That's not that sexy. It's not that attractive. People don't want to do that. Yeah. Speaking of talking with smart people, so let's shift into marketing and like the role what you do with marketing. Talk me through, like, how is the distribution of marketing channels organized, and I guess what do you focus mainly on? Is it SEO? Is it paid ads, programmatic?
Yeah. So I have my preferences, right? And I think that the most important thing to say, right, for people that are interested in these things is that everything can work, right? And the reality is that the biggest predictor of success is how long can you focus on one or two things and ignore the shiny object syndrome, right? Because listen, of course you can do SEO wrong, of course you can do outbound wrong, of course you can do ads wrong, right? But you can also do them right. And the difference between those two really is how long, obviously the education, right? But also how long you have at it. And the thing that I see a lot of marketers and marketing teams fail is that they try something for a month and then either them or, and this is especially tough, the boss, right? And the boss gets impatient, right? And the prospects aren't coming, the leads aren't converting, the whatever, and then they pivot and they pivot again and they keep on pivoting, and they really don't acquire both personal and institutional knowledge, right? And there's a reason that businesses operate in quarters. It's because you need a quarter to remove the variance, right, of things. And the reality is that this is not a popular opinion, but even highly competent teams struggle to ship anything in under a month, right? But sometimes, I've worked with companies, right, where, after a week, the boss was knocking on the door, to get results. And I understand, right? Money is leaking, right? So there's a tension there. But so to answer your question, I'm a content marketing guy. Because I started writing content and I graduated to copywriting. So, that's where I got my chops. That's something that I still enjoy a lot. So we're very, strong on the SEO. We've invested in SEO for very long, and that's still what produces the most results, the most results for us. But, for example, I have a little side business that we didn't talk about, before, just, in the interest of time, but I have a self-publishing side business writing fantasy books, and that business is profitable on ads alone. I don't do anything else, right? Basically run, both Facebook and Amazon ads. And then, I'll also ads in more specific book niches, book advertisement niches that probably only 0.001% of your audience ever heard about. So no use going there. But, and again, outbound works too, right? You really need just to have at it long enough in order that you begin to learn the sort of things that you can't learn just by reading a blog article or an ebook.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of credence to what you say, like having the experience in one sector or kind of like, cutting your teeth or building your chops. AI can produce a lot of really good content, but now what I'm hearing over and over is the distinguishing factor is taste. Like, how well do you know your audience and how well can you connect your worldview and your perspectives to that audience? Through the technicality of how to actually execute any of these campaigns or industries or expertise. I'm curious what sort of content formats have driven the strongest pipeline, or what have had the biggest influence on pipeline?
What has driven the biggest in pipeline?
Yeah, I guess what sort of content formats, like short form or...
Well, again, a big thing, right, was the podcast, right? That's not necessarily because, again, the problem with AI stuff is that it's still very new. And what I found is that the best content that you produce is not really one-off content, it's assets that accrue over time, right? So in terms of content, right, the podcast that I produce over several years at one episode a week. At some point I shifted to one episode, two episodes a month, right? Over time keeps producing a lot. The boring technical pages, right, that we made years ago. Technical stuff like, interview questions to ask a JavaScript developer, etc., right? Which are things that, we use AI to maintain and keep up to date. But the reality is that those were created far before AI, right? That there really is, when you do very well vetted, very good crafted content, right? It feels like a waste of time at the time. But over the months, and especially over the years, it compounds.
Yeah.
Right. There are keywords, SEO keywords, that we were fighting for like 18 months. 18 months. And there's a real stress, when your boss knocks on your door asking, where is this SEO budget going from? I'm not seeing form fills. I'm not seeing prospects.
Yeah.
But then after 18 months, the people start filling those forms, right? And they start being prospects and they start converting. It's the hardest part of marketing, is accepting that the game is very often slower than you think, right? And some people try to compensate for this by feeding it cash, right? And on some point, cash is definitely an accelerator, right? If I can get 1,000 clicks in 1 month versus 1,000 clicks in 3 months, that's generally good. But time matters as well, right? Because it could happen that those 1,000 clicks, if you get them in 1 month, right? I see this with my books. If that month happens to be the month, well, let's say, a certain country decides to bomb another country, then that is an effect in the general mood of purchasing, of people making purchasing decisions, right? So maybe that was an off month and you just got, and if you had those 1,000 clicks spread over a quarter, then maybe the picture would be less volatile, right? So the reality is that, obviously more data is better. So if you can spend money to acquire more, if you can spend that money, if you have that discretionary budget to gather more data, that is good, but do not discount the time dimension. But if you're asking about the actual, in DistantJob terms, despite our SEO being very healthy, I found that the biggest actionable thing in marketing has been just the highest LTV acquisition channel, let's say, have actually been relationships, which is something that most marketers shy away from because they're very hard, very boring to quantify.
Yeah.
So if people hate CRMs, people hate spreadsheets, I have an edge there because I'm actually a big nerd. I don't particularly enjoy CRMs, but I love my spreadsheets, right? And if you keep meticulously track, right, of the people that your salesperson met on this conference at this many time and do the religious follow-ups and et cetera, and actually have notes, right? Have notes saying, oh, this guy, I followed up with him 3 months ago and at that time, he was working at this company, he was struggling with this pain point, this pain point, this pain point there, right? And if you do that, and if you keep that spreadsheet is a gold mine. But guess what? Marketers don't like stuff they can't automate. They want tools they can click a button, spit a CSV, put the CSV on Claude, and Claude, give me a picture, right? When you're dealing with people, you actually have to talk to your salespeople to say, hey, what business cards did you get on that conference? Let's put them on our system. Let's put them on the CRM. When was the last time you talked with Bob? What were Bob's problems? This is horrible to manage. This is real work, right? This is a grind, but guess what? It's the highest LTV.
Yeah. No, I can definitely appreciate relationships, conferences, networking events. Face-to-face and then online is
quantifying.
The
problem is not doing these things. Everyone does these things, but they don't quantify it. Because they don't quantify it, just they spend years and years attending conferences, years and years having conversations in LinkedIn, and they don't get results because they can't measure stuff.
Or they think they don't get the results because, again, it's not tracked. Maybe it is. Maybe
also,
they do get the results, but what are we supposed to attribute that to?
Yeah.
I completely agree. Our CEO is at a conference right now, and 2 weeks ago we were at another conference in California, and we have, 10 or so more conferences lined up. So that is an initiative of mine, is to how do we make that transition from in person to online and then assign
Yeah.
and track the metrics? How do we make that just a super simple process? If you have any insights, definitely share with me offline, because I'm
Yeah.
curious. I'm curious about that right now. Luis, as we wrap up the conversation, looking into 2026, looking into the next year, what do you think is going to change the most, and what do you think won't change at all in terms of marketing?
What is going to change the most? Yeah, in terms of marketing. Well, it's so I'm currently thinking a lot, as we've talked before, about AI, right? And how
Mhm.
AI changes the game. And I think it removes a lot of busy work. A lot of people are talking about the AI and SEO, right? Optimizing for generative AI citations, SEO strategy changes for the LLM, and especially AI overviews, zero click impact, right? All of these things. And what I think that is not going to change is the basics, right?
Mhm.
If you have strong fundamentals, right? If you're focusing on these things now, you're playing a red queen game, right? This is a
Mhm.
term that I like to use. In Alice in Wonderland, the Queen of Hearts, she says something. I'm going to butcher this quote, but it's something to the effect of, "In my kingdom, you need to run all the time just to stay in the same place."
Mhm.
That's the portrait of someone playing catch up to the newest technology developments.
Mhm.
I prefer, instead of using the red queen paradigm, I try to make my work stand by the Matthew principle, which is, to those who already have everything, more will be given. To those who
Mhm.
have nothing, nothing will be given. Something along these lines. Again, I'm probably butchering the quote, but you get the sense, right?
Yeah.
If you have a good SEO baseline, if you've been doing, for years and years, the work of creating online digital assets, those baseline landing pages that you've been nurturing over years, the Distant Job podcast, in our case, guess what? Where do we get AI citation from? From the podcast that I recorded 2 years ago,
Mm.
right? Because they spell authority, and I don't mean to be disheartening to the people who are getting into the game today, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
The thing that I want people to understand is that, by all means, work with the AI revolution, right? Use it to your advantage as much as you can,
Mhm.
but your focus should be really in building stuff, right? That will position you to be at the forefront of the next thing,
Mm.
right? And that doesn't change, right? That's building authoritative, building authority, figures in your company, building
Mhm.
authoritative content, providing value consistently to people, because value is always valuable.
Mm. Mhm.
So did that
Position.
answer your question? I think I meandered a little bit.
Yeah, no, no,
Yeah.
no. I mean, the basics, creating authority. I mean, a lot of the times we see that's good content, and that's also a strong foundational backlink profile. Like
Yeah.
that's a lot of what we do. And yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. AI can help with a lot of that, but at the end of the day, if the business is good in real life, I think that's what's gonna, show up even more moving forward. Fake reviews. You can't fake real authority in real life. And I think that's what's going to show up in 2026.
Yeah, remember, everyone can generate content now at the press of a button. We can argue if it's good content, bad content, so-so
Mm.
content, right? I
Hmm.
know we have different opinions on that, but the reality, right, is that you can't generate authority on demand. Conversations like this, like we're having now, right? Or just things like client testimonials, success stories, case
Hmm.
studies, right? Those are things, again, that they require more than just simply well structured thought process and beautiful words, right? They require something that actually happened, and they require your interaction with another human being that was validating your effort.
Yeah, exactly. So as we wrap up the conversation, Luis, here, where can we find you online? And there he is. Where can we find you online and
Yeah.
learn more about your work?
Yeah, well, I don't particularly have a place. I suppose you can go to my LinkedIn profile. Just look for my unpronounceable, unwritable name. I suppose you can. I can ask you to ask it too. to insert a link in the show notes.
Link. Yeah.
But I would encourage people to visit, especially if they feel like they need to hire quality people, that match their culture. I would encourage them to visit DistantJob.com. Right. Again, we're a recruitment agency that specializes in finding software developers who don't just want a job, right, but genuinely want to work for you. Right.
Key distinction.
Yeah.
Thanks for the intelligent conversation, Luis. I loved your background of, taking us all the way back from your preferences and talking about your life goals and your personal health versus just the career, and bringing us all the way up to speed with what's going to happen in the next year, building real authority. It was a pleasure to have you, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for the call. It was very nice.
Cheers.